Hi, I'm Glenda Cedarleaf, and tonight's bedtime story is here to inspire and comfort you as you prepare to go to sleep. We'll be hearing excerpts from a story by Lucy Larcom and a closing poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. Both of these authors lived in Massachusetts in the United States in the 1800s. Although written so many years ago, these writings are spiritually inspiring and relevant, exploring themes of childhood, divine connection, and friendship. Timeless truths are beautifully captured with many references to the qualities of nature, especially the ocean. So I invite you now to become comfortable in the ways that you know best. Allowing your mind and body to begin to wind down and relax. Getting comfortable in your bed, feeling it support you. As you simply allow these words to float into your consciousness and bring you into a place of safety and peace. And now we begin the story. It is one of the most beautiful facts in this human existence of ours that we remember the earliest and freshest part of it most vividly. It was meant that our childhood should live on in us forever. I can see very distinctly the child that I was, and I know how the world looked to her, far off as she is now. She seems to me like my little sister, at play in a garden where I can at any time return and find her. I have enjoyed bringing her back and letting her tell her story, almost as if she were somebody else. And I hope never to part company with her. It is strange that the spot of earth where we were born should make such a difference to us. People can live and grow anywhere, but people as well as plants have their habitat, the place where they belong, and where they find their happiest, most natural life. If I had opened my eyes upon this planet elsewhere than on this green, rocky strip of shore, it seems to me as if I must have been somebody else and not myself. These gray ledges hold me by the roots as they do the bayberry bushes, the sweet fern, and the rocks. When I look from my window over the treetops to the sea, I can almost imagine the wistful eyes of the Lady Arbella as she arrived from England on a ship. Lady Arabella Johnson was known as the sweetest of womanly pioneers, like an angel who, while passing on to heaven, just touched the rough coast of our forebears with her wings. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to look into her eyes, into the eyes of that dear and gracious spirit. In those primitive years before any town but Salem had been named, this whole region was known as Cape Ann Side. And my first ancestors' names appeared among those of the other hardy settlers of the neighborhood. I am proud of them, for they were so humble that they didn't care whether their names would be remembered or not. I believe that we understand ourselves best and are best understood by others through our connection with those who we knew in our earliest years. So when I came to be, my natural setting was formed by my family. My parents and other adult relatives were the larger planets that held our young selves to its orbit and lent it their brightness. As I think of these relatives, 3 come to mind. One was Aunt Lucy, another an adopted aunt, and the other Aunt Hannah. Lucy was my father's sister for whom I was named. She was fair, with large, clear eyes that seemed to look far into one's heart, with a penetrating expression. To my childish imagination, she was an embodiment of serene and lofty goodness. I wished and hoped that by hearing her name, I might become like her. And when I found out that Lucy means with light, I wished it more earnestly still. Her beautiful character was just such an illumination to my young life, as I should most desire mine to be to the lives of others. My adopted aunt, she taught me how to sew by helping me create clothing for my rag children. They were absurd little creatures of my own invention, limbless and destitute of features. I loved them nevertheless, far better than I did the London doll that lay in waxen state in an upper drawer at home. She was the fine lady that did not wish to be played with, but only to be looked at and admired. Behind my aunt's house was a meadow with beautiful blue flowers and gold seaside lichens. The meadow had a pungent, earthy odor, which I can even smell as I imagine it now. Our neighborhood was filled with large families, and we were allowed so much freedom to wander. We wandered on the hill. The hill was worn smooth by the feet of many childish generations. There were ledges which had shaped themselves into rock stairs, carpeted with lovely mosses in various patterns. These were the winding ways up our castle towers, with breakfast rooms and boudoirs along the landings, where we set our tables with expected guests with bits of broken china, and left our numerous rag children tucked in, asleep under malign blankets or plantain coverlets, while we ascended to the topmost turret to watch for our ships coming in from sea. We could see the ocean from the tip-top of the ledge. It was a tiny cleft peak, and it held little rain pools for thirsty birds that now and then stopped as they flew over. They would dip their beaks and glance shyly at us, as if they wished to share our games. We could also see the steeples and the smokes of Salem in the distance. The lane next to our house ran parallel with the hill and the mowing fields. It meandered into a footpath or cow path, bordered with cornfields and orchards, and then, eventually, it reached the river. I was told that the river was an arm of the sea. I saw how it reached around the town and held it in a liquid embrace. Twice a day the tide came in and filled its muddy bed with a sparkling flood. With high tide, these waters became a river. When high time came, the muddy bed became a river. Sometimes a neighbor boy who was the fortunate owner of a boat would row us down the river. The widening waters made us tremble with dread and longing for what might be beyond. For when we had passed under the piers of the bridge, the estuary broadened into the harbor and the open sea. I remember the days right at twilight that we joined a wild train of children running upward, up the narrow lane, with wind-shod feet and hair flying like the manes of young colts, and light hearts bounding to their own footsteps. How good and dear our plain, two-story dwelling house looked to us as we came inside of it, and what sweet odors stole out to meet us from the white fenced enclosure of our small garden. Peach trees and lilac bushes in bloom, bergamot and balm and beds of chamomile. There was really nothing to be afraid of in those simple, honest old times. I suppose we children would not have known how happy and safe we were in our little secluded lane with its grass-grown borders. I still delight in remembering what it felt like to be a child where its narrow limits were once my whole known world. Even then it seemed to me as if it might lead everywhere, and it was indeed, but in the moment I simply stepped forward onto this road that would lengthen and widen beneath my feet forever. Aunt Hannah had a schoolroom, and I began going to school when I was only 2. She gave me treats from glass jars containing sticks of striped barley candy and red and white peppermint drops. She was very kind and motherly. I learned my letters in a few days, standing at her knee, while she pointed them out in the spelling book with a pen. And the Bible passage which I learned first and most delighted to repeat after Aunt Hannah was, I think, her favorite too. Let your heart not be troubled. In my Father's house are many mansions. The voice in the book seemed so tender. Somebody was speaking who had a heart, and who knew that even a little child's heart was sometimes troubled. It was a beautiful vision that came to me with the words, I could see it best with my eyes shut. A great dim door standing ajar, opening out of rosy morning mists, overhung with swaying vines and arching boughs that were full of birds, and from beyond the door, the ripple of running waters and the sound of many happy voices. And above them all, the one voice that was saying, I go to prepare a place for you. The vision gave me a sense of freedom, fearless and infinite. What was there to be afraid of anywhere? Even we little children could see the open door of our Father's house. We were playing around its threshold now, and we need never wander out of sight of it. The feeling was a vague one, but it was like a remembrance. The spacious mansions were not far away. They were my home. I had known them and should return to them again. This dim half-memory which perhaps comes to all children, I had felt when younger still, almost before I could walk, sitting on the floor in a square of sunshine made by an open window, the leaf shadows from great boughs outside dancing and wavering around me. I seemed to be talking to them, and they to me, in unknown tongues that left within me an ecstasy yet unforgotten. These shadows had brought a message to me from an unseen somewhere, which my baby heart was to keep forever. The wonder of that moment often returns. Shadow traceries of bough and leaf still seem to me like this hieroglyphics of a lost language. The stars brought me the same feeling. I remember the surprise they were to me, seen for the first time. One evening, I was taken in somebody's arms, my sister's, I think, outside the door, and lifted up under the dark, still, clear sky, splendid with stars. Than they have ever seemed since. All my little being shaped itself into a subdued, delighted, oh, and then the exultant thought flitted through my mind of this reluctant child as she was carried in. Why, that is the roof of the house I live in. After that, I always went to sleep happier, for I knew that the stars were outside, there in the dark, even when I couldn't see them. I did firmly believe that I came from some other country to this. I had a vague notion that we were all here on a journey, that this was not the place where we really belonged. I used to talk in sober earnest about what happened before I was a little girl and came here to live. And it did seem to me as if I remembered. Nonetheless, I was hardy and robust, full of frolicsome health, and very fond of the matter-of-fact world I lived in. My sturdy little feet felt the solid earth beneath them. I grew with the sprouting grass and enjoyed my life as the buds and birds seemed to enjoy theirs. It was only as if the bud and the bird and the dear warm earth knew, in the same dumb way that I did, that all their joy and sweetness came to them out of the sky. These recollections that so distinctly belonged to myself as a baby, before I could even speak my thoughts, were clear and vivid, and they're still difficult to put into shape. As I think back to my childhood, it seems to me as if the air was full of hymns, as it was of the fragrance of clover blossoms and the songs of bluebirds and robins and the deep undertone of the sea. Elves and gnomes, air sprites and genies were no strangers to us. For my sister Emily, She who heard me say my hymns and taught me to write was mistress of an almost limitless fund of imaginative lore. To me, she was a very Scheherazade of storytellers. I loved to listen to her with fascinated wakefulness while twilight grew into moonlight, evening after evening. Besides the tales that the child world of all ages is familiar with, Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty, and the rest, she shared many folk stories of Ireland and Scotland and the wild legends of Germany. My sisters were also fond of giving me surprises, of watching my wonder at seeing anything beautiful or strange for the first time. Once, when I was very little, she made me supremely happy by rousing me before 4 o'clock in the morning, dressing me hurriedly, and taking me out with her for a walk across the graveyard and through the dewy fields. The birds were singing and the sun was just rising, and we were walking toward the east, hand in hand, when suddenly there appeared before us what looked to me like an immense blue wall, stretching right and left as far as I could see. "Oh, what is it the wall of?" I cried. It was a revelation she had meant for me. "So you did not know it was the sea, little girl?" she said. And I took in at that moment for the first time something of the real grandeur of the ocean. Not a sail was in sight, and the blue expanse was scarcely disturbed by a ripple. It was high tide, calm. That morning's freshness, that vision of the sea, I knew I could never lose. The garret was my usual retreat when I wanted to get away by myself with my books or my dreams. From the garret window I could see the white breakers dashing against the long, narrow island just outside of the harbor. The far-off shining band of silver and blue seemed so different from the whole great sea, stretching out as if into eternity. I loved to wander alone through the field paths, enjoying the freedom of being a solitary explorer among the seashells and the wildflowers. I would gather the shells into my apron and carry them home. The tide itself was the greatest marvel, slipping away so noiselessly and creeping back so softly over the flats, whispering as it reached the sands and laughing aloud. "I am coming," dashing against the rocks. I listened and felt through all my little being that great, surging power. Coming home from school one warm noon, I chanced to look down and saw for the first time the dry roadside all starred with lavender-tinted flowers, scarcely larger than a pinhead. Fairy flowers indeed, prettier than anything that grew in gardens. It was the red sandwort, but why a purple flower should be called red, I do not know. I remember holding these little amethystine blossoms like jewels in the palm of my hand, and wondering whether people who walked along that road knew what beautiful things they were treading upon. I never found the flower open except at noonday, when the sun was hottest. The rest of the time, it was nothing but an insignificant, dusty-leaved weed. A weed that was transformed into a flower only for an hour or two every day. It seemed like magic. I also loved the dandelions. We would blow the fuzz off their gray heads. We sat down together in the velvety grass and wove chains for our necks and wrists of the dandelion sterns, and made believe we were brides or queens or empresses. Violets and anemones played a hide-and-seek with us in shady places. The columbine rooted herself among the bleak rocks and laughed and nodded in the face of the east wind, coquettishly wasting the show of her finery on the frowning air. Bluebirds twittered over the dandelions in spring. In midsummer, goldfinches warbled among the thistle tops, and high above the bird congregations, the song sparrow sent forth her clear, warm, penetrating trill. Sunshine translated into music. In those days, we grew up happy and healthy, learning unconsciously the useful lesson of doing without while fully enjoying the beauty of nature. When I first opened my eyes upon my native town, it was already nearly 200 years old, counting from the time when it was part of the original Salem settlement, old enough to have gained a character and an individuality of its own, as it certainly had. We children felt at once that we belonged to the town, as we did to our father and our mother. The sea was its nearest neighbor and penetrated to every fireside, claiming close intimacy with every home and heart. The farmers up and down the shore were as much fishermen as farmers. They were as familiar with the grand banks of Newfoundland as they were with their own potato fields. The pathos of the sea haunted the town when a coming northeaster brought the waves from the islands across the harbor bar, with a moaning like that we heard when we listened for it in the shell. My brother John also loved being outdoors. Sometimes he would take me with him when he went huckleberrying up the rural Montserrat Road, through Cat Swamp, to the edge of Burnt Hills and Beaver Pond. He had a boy's pride in explaining these localities to me, making me understand that I had a guide who was familiar with every inch of the way. Then, charging me not to move until he came back, he would leave me sitting alone on a great craggy rock while he went off and filled his basket out of sight among the bushes. Indeed, I did not want to move. It was all so new and fascinating. The tall pine trees whispering to each other across the sky openings above me. The graceful ferns, the velvet mosses, dotted with scarlet fairy cups, as if the elves had just spread their table for tea. The unspeakable charm of the spice-breathing air all wove a web of enchantment about me, from which I had no wish to disentangle myself. The silent spell of the woods held me with a power stronger than that of the solemn-voiced sea. Sometimes this same brother would get permission to take me on a longer excursion, to visit the old homestead at the farms. 3 or 4 miles was not thought too long a walk for a healthy child of 5 years. And that road in the old time led through a rural paradise, beautiful at every season. Whether it was the time of spring sparrows and violets, of wild roses, of coral-hung barberry bushes, or of fallen leaves and snowdrifts. The wildness of the road was its great charm to us. We stopped at the Cove Brook to hear the catbirds sing, and at Mingo's Beach to revel in the sudden surprise of the open sea, and to listen to the chant of the waves, always stronger and grander there than anywhere along the shore. We passed under dark wooded cliffs out into sunny openings, the last of which held under its skirting pines the secret of the prettiest wood path to us in all the world, the path to the ancestral farmhouse. Besides my love of the sea and of wandering through the land, my appetite for reading was insatiable. My chief pleasure in reading was when I could identify myself with every new heroine. Soon they began to call me a bookworm at home. I did not relish the title. In my search for truth, I found, just as Grotius once said, books are necessities of my life. Food and clothing I can do without if I must. So for me, my must-have was poetry. And fortunately, poetry is not a purchasable material. Instead, it is an atmosphere in which every life may expand. I found it everywhere about me. I realized that I could not live without it. The thought of it was to me like the thought of God and of truth. To leave out poetry would be to lose the real meaning of life. I felt this very blindly and vaguely, no doubt, but the feeling was deep. I now regard a love for poetry as one of the most important aspects of being a human. It was the greatest of blessings to me, in the long days of toil, that the poetry I held in my memory breathed its enchanted atmosphere through me and around me, and touched even dull drudgery with its sunshine. Poetry is one of the angels. It is of the highest. It is the divine voice, always, that we recognize through the poets whenever they most deeply move our souls. Nature does not write down her sunsets, her starry skies, her mountains, and her oceans in some smaller style to suit the comprehension of little children. They do not need any such delusion. Eventually, our family moved down by the river. To live beside a river was my dream of romance. Rivers, as I pictured them, came down from the mountains and were born in the clouds. They were bordered by green meadows and graceful trees, leaning over to gaze into their bright mirrors. Our shallow tidal creek was the only river I had known. I soon made myself familiar with the rocky nooks among Pawtucket Falls, shaded with hemlocks and white birches. Strange new wildflowers grew beside the rushing waters. Among them Sir Walter Scott's own harebells, which I had never thought of except as blossoms of poetry. Here they were, as real to me as to his Lady of the Lake. I loved the harebell, the first new flower the river gave me, as I had never loved a flower before. The slope behind our mills was a green lawn. The overseers had flower gardens. We passed into our work through a splendor of dahlias and hollyhocks. Sometime every summer, a fleet of canoes would glide noiselessly up the river, and a company of Native Americans would land at a green point almost in sight of our windows. Pawtucket Hills had always been one of their favorite camping places. The transition from childhood to girlhood, when a little girl has had an almost unlimited freedom of out-of-door life, is practically the toning down of a mild sort of barbarianism, and is often attended by a painfully awkward self-consciousness. I had an innate dislike of conventionalities. I clung to the child's inalienable privilege of running half wild, and when I found out that I really was growing up, I felt quite rebellious. And the greatest pity about it was that I too soon became accustomed to the situation. I felt like a child, but considered it my duty to think and behave like a woman. And I began to look upon it as a very serious thing. One of the loveliest persons I ever knew was a young girl who worked opposite to me in the spinning room. Our eyes made us friends long before we spoke to each other. She was an orphan, well-bred and well-educated, about 20 years old, and she had brought with her to her place of toil her sister's child, who was an orphan. The one comfort of Caroline's life was this beautiful little niece to whom she could go home when the day's work was over. Her bereavements had given an appealing sadness to her whole expression, but she had accepted them, and her changed circumstances with the submission of profound faith which everybody about her felt in everything she said and did. I think I first knew through her how character can teach without words. To see her and her little niece together was almost like looking at a picture of the Madonna. Caroline afterwards became a part of my mother's family, and we were warm friends until her death a few years ago. I was making discoveries about life every day and about myself. I had naturally some elements of the recluse and would never, of my own choice, have lived in a crowd. I loved quietness. The noise of machinery was particularly distasteful to me. But I found that the crowd was made up of single human lives, not one of them wholly uninteresting, when separately known. I learned also that there are many things which belong to the whole world of us together, that no one of us, nor any few of us, can claim or enjoy for ourselves alone. I discovered, too, that I could so accustom myself to the noise that it became like a silence to me. Like a plant that starts up in showers and sunshine and does not know which has best helped it to grow, it's actually difficult to say whether the hard things or the pleasant things did me most good. But when I was sincerest with myself, as also when I thought least about it, I know that I was glad to be alive and to just be where I was. I would think about how we are entirely separate and yet entirely belong to the whole. This is a truth that we can learn to rejoice in as we come to understand more and more of ourselves and of this human life of ours, which seems so complicated and yet so simple. Like most young girls, I had a motherly fondness for little children, and my 2 baby nephews were my pride and delight. The older one had a delicate constitution, and there was a thoughtful, questioning look in his eyes that seemed to gaze forward almost sadly and foresee that he should never attain to manhood. The younger, a plump, vigorous urchin, 3 or 4 months old, did without doubt feel his life in every limb. He was my special charge, for his brother's clinging weakness gave him the place nearest his mother's heart. The tie between my lovely baby nephew and myself became very close. The first 2 years of a child's life are its most appealing years to me and call out all the latent tenderness of the nature on which it leans for protection. I think I should have missed one of the best educating influences of my life if I had not had the care of that baby for a year or more, just as I entered my teens. I was never so happy as when I held him in my arms, sleeping or walking, and he, happy anywhere, was always contented when he was with me. I think indeed that every item of real knowledge I ever acquired has come into use somewhere or somehow in the course of the years. But these were not the things I had most wished to do. The whole world of thought lay unexplored before me, a world of which I had already caught large and tempting glimpses. And I did not like to feel the horizon shutting me in, even to so pleasant a corner as this. I regard it as one of the privileges of my youth that I was permitted to grow up among those active, interesting girls whose lives were not mere echoes of other lives, but had principle and purpose distinctly their own. The New Hampshire girls were descendants of the sturdy backwoodsmen who settled that state scarcely 100 years before. Their grandmothers had suffered the hardships of frontier life. Those young women did justice to their inheritance. They were earnest and capable, ready to undertake anything that was worth doing. They gave me a larger, firmer ideal of womanhood. Often during the many summers and autumns that I spent among the New Hampshire hills, sometimes far up the mountainsides, I could listen to the first song of the little brooks setting out on their journey to join the very river that flowed at my feet when I was a working girl on its banks. I have felt as if I could also hear the early music of my workmates' lives, those who were born among those glorious summits, strong, crystalline natures, carrying down with them the light of blue skies and the freshness of free winds to their place of toil, broadening and strengthening as they went on. Who can tell how they have refreshed the world, how beautifully they have blended their being with the great ocean of results? A girl's place in the world is a very strong one, and her weakness comes also from her inclination to lean against something, upon an unworthy support, rather than none at all. She often lets her life get broken into fragments among the flimsy trellises of fashion and conventionality. It is the first duty of every woman to recognize the mutual bond of universal womanhood, to support her human sisters rather than compete with them. I also learned that there is much to enjoy in this beautiful outside world, much more to love, to believe in, and to seek in the invisible world out of which it all grows. What has best revealed our true selves to ourselves must be most helpful to others. Besides, if we tell our own story at all, we naturally wish to tell the truest part of it. I had a friend about my own age, and between us there was something very much like what is called a schoolgirl friendship, a kind of intimacy supposed to be superficial, but often as deep and permanent as it is pleasant. Eliza and I managed to see each other every other day, and in that friendship we exchanged confidences, laughed and cried together, read, wrote, walked, visited, and studied together. I learned at an early age not to expect that life would be easy, but it didn't take away the wish to have it so. What a world it would be if there were no hills to climb. Our powers were given us that we might conquer obstacles and clear obstructions from the overgrown human path, and grow strong by striving, led onwards, always by an invisible guide. Life for me, as I looked forward, was a bright blank of mystery, like the broad western tracts of our continent, which in the atlases of those days bore the title of unexplored regions. It was to be penetrated, struggled through, and its difficulties were not greatly dreaded. I knew that there was no joy like the joy of pressing forward. The years between 1835 and 1845 seemed to me, as I look back at them, singularly interesting years. People were guessing and experimenting and wondering and prophesying about a great many things, and almost everything. We were only beginning to get accustomed to steamboats and railroads. A comet appeared, and also a very unusual illumination of sky and earth by the aurora borealis. This latter occurred in midwinter. The whole heavens were of a deep rose color, almost crimson, reddest at the zenith, and paling as it radiated towards the horizon. The snow was fresh on the ground, and that too was of a brilliant red. Cold as it was, windows were thrown up all around us for people to look out at the wonderful sight. And from this place, life to me, as I looked forward, was a bright blank of mystery. So in closing, let me say to you that if I learned anything by living, it is this, that the meaning of life is education, not through book knowledge alone, sometimes entirely without it. Education is growth, the development of our best possibilities from within outward. This world of human beings by whom we are surrounded. The beauty of belonging to this school is that we cannot learn anything in it by ourselves alone, but for and with our fellow pupils, the wide earth over. Humility, sympathy, helpfulness, and faith are the best teachers in this great university. The real satisfaction of living is, and must forever be, the education of all for each. Every phase of our life belongs to us. The moon does not, except in appearance, lose her first thin, luminous curve, nor her silvery crescent, in rounding to her fullness. We are both child and adult. We have a right to our entire selves through all the changes of this mortal state, a claim which we shall doubtless carry along with us into the unfolding mysteries of our eternal being. Perhaps in this thought lies the hidden secret of immortal youth. For a seer has said that to grow old in heaven is to grow young, to take life as it is sent to us, to live it faithfully. This was the lesson that came to me from my early teachers. It was not an easy lesson, but it was a healthful one, and I pass it on. Young or old, we may all win inspiration to do our best. From the needs of a world to which the humblest life may be permitted to bring immeasurable blessings. And now we close with an excerpt from a poem called My Psalm. I mourn no more my vanished years. Beneath a tender rain, an April rain of smiles and tears, my heart is young again. The west winds blow, and singing low, I hear the glad streams run. The windows of my soul I throw wide open to the sun. No longer forward nor behind I look in hope or fear, but grateful take the good I find, the best of now and here. That more and more a providence of love is understood, making the springs of time and sense sweet with eternal good. That death seems but a covered way which opens into light, in purple distance fair, that all the jarring notes of life seem blending in a psalm, and all the angles of its strife slow rounding into calm. And so the shadows fall apart, and so the west winds play, and all the windows of my heart I open to the day. This is the end of our story and poem. I hope you sleep peacefully and deeply now. Until next time, I wish you sweet dreams and good night.